The flashing lights painted the sky in fractured colors. She pulled over slowly, steady hands on the wheel, refusing to tremble. The officer approached, posture wide, authority spilling in every step. License, registration, he barked, not meeting her eyes. She rolled the window down. Evening, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop? His jaw clenched. Don't question me. Step out of the vehicle. A pause. The sound of cicadas filled the silence. She unclipped her seatbelt, her voice even. I've done nothing wrong. He leaned closer, the smell of tobacco clinging to his uniform. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She stepped onto the gravel shoulder. The road stretched empty, the dying sun behind her. The gun at his hip seemed louder than his words. Kneel, he ordered. Her breath caught, though her face stayed calm. Kneel? She repeated, almost softly, as if testing the weight of the word. That's right. On the ground. Hands where I can see them. A truck passed in the distance, horn echoing. She lowered herself. Not from fear, but from something older. The quiet resilience her grandmother once called survival. You think this makes you strong? She murmured. Voice steady but low enough to force him to lean closer. His lips curled, but there was a flicker in his eyes, not triumph, but discomfort. For a second he looked around, realizing the vast emptiness had turned into a stage. She stayed there, knees pressing the dirt, yet her gaze never dropped. And in that silence, the imbalance became visible. The officer held the weapon, but she carried something heavier, the unbearable calm of someone who refused to break. ChatGPT said, the sharp rap against the window broke the stillness. His knuckles, heavy and impatient, echoed like a warning. She turned her head slowly, eyes steady, refusing to flinch. Roll it down, he snapped, leaning closer. His breath fogged the glass. She lowered it halfway. I can hear you fine, his jaw tightened. Don't play games. Step out of the car now! Her hands remained on the wheel, fingers spread. Why? The word was calm, simple, stripped of fear. He shifted, caught off guard by her composure. Because I said so. Silence stretched. Cars passed in the distance, their drivers glancing but not stopping. The world always watched but rarely intervened. She exhaled slowly. You don't need to shout. I'm not resisting. His knuckles tapped again on the metal frame, softer this time, less certain. Then move. She unlocked the door and stepped out, her every movement deliberate, measured. Gravel crunched under her shoes, the sound filling the air between them. He loomed closer, trying to tower, but the stillness of her gaze forced him back an inch. It wasn't defiance. It was something more unsettling. You think staying calm makes you better than me? He muttered. She tilted her head, voice steady. No, it just makes me harder to break. His lips parted as if to answer, but no words came. For a flicker of a moment, his authority trembled, not because she fought, but because she refused to bend in the way he expected. The silence pressed harder than any command he could give, and she let it linger, watching him wrestle with a power he could no longer fully claim. ChatGPT said, "Step out of the car," he barked again, louder this time. The order carried weight, but it wasn't strength. It was strain. The silence that followed pressed on him harder than her refusal ever could. She tilted her head, eyes steady. Is there a reason, officer? The words hung between them, sharp, clean. No shouting, no anger. Just truth spoken like a scalpel. His throat tightened. Don't question me. Do what I say. She didn't move. Then explain it. To me. To them? She glanced almost lazily at the cars now crawling by, drivers leaning just enough to witness. Phones lifted quietly, recording. His pulse quickened. You think an audience changes this? Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, not mockery, control. No, but it makes silence heavier. Narration lingered in the quiet. He was a man used to commanding obedience. But obedience was no longer instant. Every second she stayed calm, his authority cracked. Don't test me, he muttered, shifting his stance. Her voice lowered, steady as stone. I'm not testing you. I'm asking the question you don't want to answer. The crowd thickened without gathering. just scattered strangers whose eyes refused to look away. He swallowed, jaw clenching, searching for words. She gave him none, only stillness, and for the first time he realized the danger wasn't her defiance. It was her composure. One question, one pause. That was all it took to turn the spotlight. Narration whispered through the moment. He had guns, badges, and sirens. She had only a sentence. Yet, in that instant, the sentence carried more weight than all his noise. Engines hummed as cars slowed, windows sliding down just enough for whispers and camera lenses to slip through. Dozens of eyes fixed on the scene, each phone capturing angles the officer couldn't control. His shoulders squared, but the stiffness betrayed unease more than authority. "Put that phone down," he barked at a man leaning from his car. The driver didn't flinch. "It's staying up." The reply wasn't loud, yet it cut like glass. The officer turned back, jaw locked. "You're making this worse for yourself," he told her, forcing the words to sound firm. Her gaze never shifted. "Am I?" The silence behind her words spread like fire. More phones rose, lenses glittering against fading daylight. No shouts, no chants, only a quiet recording of truth, each second saved for tomorrow's headlines. Narration whispered through the weight. He thought command came from orders. But in that moment, command belonged to the stillness he could not bend. He stepped closer, boots grinding gravel. "You think this little audience changes who's in charge?" Her voice was steady, unbroken. "No, it shows them who you are when you think no one's watching." A hush spread. Even the road seemed to slow, the sound of tires fading into background noise. Every witness leaned closer without moving. His hands twitched at his belt, not in action but in hesitation. The badge on his chest looked heavier now, as if dragging him down. She didn't blink, didn't move. She simply stood in silence, and the silence became unbearable. Narration lingered. Noise fades. Orders fade, but silence, witnessed by many, becomes history. And history was already recording. Gravel crunched softly under her shoes as she stepped out, every movement deliberate, her calm defying his looming frame. His smirk widened as though the stage was his alone, arrogance dripping from the tilt of his chin. "You finally listening?" he muttered, leaning forward, voice thick with control. Her eyes didn't waver. "Careful." The word wasn't loud, but it froze the air. His head tilted, smirk twitching. What was that? She drew a steady breath, shoulders square, not in defiance, but in dignity. "You're addressing a colonel of the United States Army." The silence after was heavier than any command. Phones stayed raised, hands trembling not from fear but anticipation. Every bystander caught the flicker across his face, a man certain of power suddenly questioning it. His jaw worked, but no words came. "You're lying," he forced out, though even his voice cracked. Her stare answered before her lips did. "You already know I'm not." Narration cut through the silence. He had raised his badge like a shield, but in that moment it looked small against the weight of her truth. He shifted, his posture faltering. "Why didn't you say that sooner?" Her reply came slow, steady. "Because men like you never listen until silence breaks you first." The crowd's hush thickened. A single cough in the distance sounded like thunder in the pause. He stepped back. But the retreat wasn't physical. It was in his eyes, his voice, the unraveling certainty of his role. For the first time, his smirk was gone. Narration lingered. Respect can't be forced by guns or orders. Sometimes it's shattered by a single sentence. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence as Marcus slid another drawer open. Yellowing pages lay stacked, the ink fading, but the weight undeniable. He traced a finger over one, the handwriting shaky, desperate. "Look at this," he muttered, voice low. She wrote it shaking. "You can almost feel it." Beside him, Rosa leaned closer. Her eyes scanned the lines. Words about her son stopped without reason, searched, then struck when he asked why. Her jaw tightened. "They called it minor disturbance," she whispered. "Minor? He was 14. Marcus swallowed. His hands lingered on the paper longer than needed. Every word buried here was someone's cry, and they folded it up, shoved it down, and locked it away. The officer across the desk shifted uncomfortably. Procedures were followed back then. he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Rosa turned her gaze on him, steady and cold. Procedures? The word tasted bitter. Your procedures broke bones. They silenced mothers. They taught boys to fear their own faces in the mirror. The officer didn't answer. His eyes dropped to the desk, the badge on his chest suddenly feeling heavier. Marcus let the paper fall back into place, the drawer closing with a dull thud. You think time erases this? Dust doesn't clean wounds. It just hides them. For a moment, no one moved. The silence pressed in, heavier than the stack of files. Finally, Rosa spoke again, quieter this time, almost to herself. They thought we'd forget. But paper remembers. The officer's throat bobbed, his smirk gone. Replaced by something fragile, uneasy recognition. The room stayed still, the air itself holding its breath. The drawer's echo had barely faded when Marcus's phone buzzed against the table. He hesitated, then pressed play. A grainy video filled the screen. Someone's trembling hands holding up a phone, capturing the same officer who now sat across from them. His voice crackled through the tiny speaker. Step out of the car. Don't make me tell you again. The recording wobbled, but the sound of fear was steady, undeniable. A boy's voice pleaded faintly, I didn't do anything. Then came the shove. Rosa's hand clenched the edge of the desk. They filmed it, she whispered, her breath sharp. The officer stiffened. That was taken out of context. But his tone was thinner now, the weight of certainty draining away. Marcus didn't look at him. He replayed the clip, each second longer than the last. The shove repeated, the boy's stumble clearer, the silence that followed louder. Context? Marcus muttered. Tell me what context makes this right. The phone's screen dimmed, but the sound already lived outside the device. People had seen it, shared it, spoken about it. What once sat buried in dusty drawers was now burning across screens, impossible to bury. Rosa finally turned her eyes back to the officer. It's not whispers anymore. It's the world watching. They're not asking us to prove it. They can see it. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No explanation came. His smirk was gone, his jaw tight, shoulders sinking as though the weight of every shared view pressed against him. Marcus slid the phone across the table. You can't silence a screen, he said quietly. It remembers louder than paper. The room thickened with stillness. This time, the silence belonged to him. ChatGPT said the video had already escaped their grip when the blinds were drawn halfway shut. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and sweat, though no one dared to shift in their seats. Internal affairs sat hunched around the table. The screen paused on the officer's shove. The frozen frame filled the silence more than any word could. One man cleared his throat. We should have handled this years ago. His voice cracked, thin, almost swallowed by the hum of the overhead lights. A woman across from him shook her head. Years? We had it last month. Sat right in this room and signed it away like nothing. The officer's name glared from the file on the table, marked with stamps, signatures, the polished cover of authority. The words inside, complaints, bruises, fear, felt like ghosts returning. He wasn't supposed to. Escalate like this, another muttered, though the excuse sounded hollow even to him. The woman's jaw tightened. He always did. We just called it something else. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of their own silence pressed harder than the scandal itself. Regret sat heavy, but regret did not undo the screen flashing in living rooms, on phones, in classrooms. Finally, one voice cut through. It doesn't matter what we do now. It's out there. It belongs to them. The words landed like a verdict. Control, once wrapped in folders and sealed drawers, had slipped from their hands. The whispers outside these walls had become a roar, and the building itself felt smaller, as though shrinking under the sound. The room dimmed with the lowering blinds, but the truth had already found the light. The air around her seemed to tighten, as if the road itself leaned closer to listen. He had stepped back after her title cut the smirk from his face, but his stare lingered, sharp, questioning. From the crowd, someone called out, "Ma'am, all this time you never said?" Her eyes shifted, not to him, not to them, but somewhere far beyond. A desert sun lived in her memory, heat pressing through sandstorms, her boots sinking but never faltering. Nights spent awake in silence, the weight of commands heavier than the rifle strapped to her side. "I wore the uniform," she murmured, her voice low but unshaken. "And still I was told to wait, to prove myself twice over, to salute men who couldn't even look me in the eye." The officer swallowed, the edges of his confidence breaking. "Then why now? Why here?" Her gaze cut through him, calm yet unrelenting. "Because silence has a time limit. Some battles must wait for the right ground. This was mine." The crowd hushed. For the first time, the quiet didn't belong to him. It wrapped around her words, carrying them further than any raised voice could. A woman near the front whispered, "She's been carrying this all along." And she had. Years of medals pinned with one hand while the other shielded scars no one asked about. Years of nodding at doors closed in her face, of fighting wars abroad only to return to different ones at home. The officer looked away first. His silence no longer commanded the scene, it revealed his collapse. She hadn't raised her tone, yet the ground beneath him shifted, leaving him with nothing to stand on but shame. The newsroom lights flickered across living rooms, the anchor's voice heavy, deliberate. "Tonight, the woman forced to kneel has been identified as Colonel Angela Morris, United States Army." The words crawled across the screen in bold, undeniable letters. In his small apartment, the officer sat rigid on the couch. His hands gripped the armrest until his knuckles paled, the remote abandoned beside him. The title repeated in a slow scroll, each letter striking harder than the last. His phone buzzed on the table. A message flashed. "You seeing this?" He didn't answer. His throat felt thick, breath shallow. The woman he had pressed down onto the asphalt was no longer faceless in his mind. Her eyes returned with every blink, steady, unflinching. The anchor continued. "Decorated for service overseas. Commendations for leadership, resilience, and valor." Each phrase widened the gap between who she was and what he had reduced her to. A whisper slipped out, barely audible even to himself. "Colonel." The word hung in the room like a verdict. Images from the video replayed on the screen. Her stillness under his weight contrasted now with her rank, her silence carrying the weight of 1,000 voices. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, as though the screen demanded confession. His reflection glared back at him in the black border of the television. Not the authority he once carried, but a man unraveling beneath his own choices. For the first time, his silence said what no defense could. Collapse had begun. And outside his walls, the world was no longer watching quietly. It was naming him, stripping the shield of power he once believed unbreakable. The screen did not blink. Neither did her title. The gavel's echo still lingered when the air turned heavier, as though the walls themselves refused to breathe. The officer sat rigid, his uniform pressed sharp, but his hands betrayed him, fingers twitching against the wooden table. Reporters leaned forward, pens suspended, waiting for words that never came. Across from him, Colonel Morris sat straight-backed, her eyes steady, unshaken by the weight of the room. She did not shift, did not frown, only met his stolen glances with quiet finality. A lawyer cleared his throat. "Officer Daniels, would you like to explain your actions?" The pause stretched, his lips parting but no sound leaving. "Finally, I was following procedure." The words dropped flat, lifeless. Colonel Morris's voice cut through, calm, unforced. "Procedure doesn't place knees on necks." The chamber stirred. Murmurs, the shuffle of reporters scribbling faster. Daniels swallowed, sweat gathering at his temple. His gaze dropped to the table. "You didn't ask my name," she continued, still composed. "You didn't ask anything at all. You decided." He shifted, jaw tightening. Her interruption was gentle, almost merciful. "You saw uniform and skin, not service." Silence followed. Even the cameras seemed to still. Daniels's lawyer placed a hand on his arm, but the officer barely registered it. His thoughts circled, cracking under the weight of her calm dismantling. The judge's voice returned, measured but firm. "Colonel, your statement is on record. Officer, you will respond in due course." Morris nodded once, not triumphant, not vindictive, simply present. Daniels lifted his eyes to her just briefly. What he saw there wasn't anger. It was worse. It was certainty. And for the first time, the courtroom recognized where power truly sat. The judge gave a short nod, signaling the lawyer to continue. The air felt brittle, like one wrong word might shatter it. "Officer Daniels," the lawyer repeated, firmer this time. "Did you ask her to kneel?" Daniels' lips parted, but only hesitation spilled out. I followed procedure." The words fell flat. "Too practiced, too empty." The audience shifted uneasily, whispers rising. A woman in the back stood. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. "He did the same to me. Pulled me over, made me sit on the curb while people drove by." Daniel's jaw twitched. He didn't look at her. Another man spoke, rough with memory. "My son, 16, he cried the whole night after." The silence after each voice was louder than the testimony itself. Daniels shifted in his chair, shoulders tightening. The lawyer pressed. "You hear them, officer?" "Still procedure?" His answer caught in his throat. He stopped, swallowing hard. Colonel Morris didn't move, didn't speak. Her stillness was more cutting than their words. Another victim stepped forward, clutching papers with shaking hands. "He never asked my name either. Just ordered, just humiliated." The courtroom was no longer watching the colonel. They were watching him. The officer who once commanded authority now sat cornered, shrinking with every story that landed like a stone. Reporters scribbled faster. Cameras caught his clenched fists, the sweat on his brow. The lawyer's final question cut clean. "Officer, is silence still your shield?" Daniels didn't answer. Couldn't. His eyes dropped, and for the first time he looked small. The room understood. His power wasn't gone in a bang. It was bleeding out, word by word. The lawyer stepped back, letting the weight of the testimonies linger. The silence was thick, every eye on Colonel Morris. She didn't rush, didn't flinch. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but cut sharper than anything yet said. "Respect," she began, steady, "is not given to a uniform. It is earned in how you treat the people you swore to protect." The words landed heavy. No flourish, no anger, just truth. The officer blinked hard, his throat moving, but no sound came. A tremor worked through his jaw. A reporter whispered, "That's it. That's the line." Pen scratched faster. The judge's gavel remained still. Even he seemed unwilling to interrupt what had just unfolded. Colonel Morris didn't look at Daniels again. Her gaze stayed forward, calm, distant. But her stillness was louder than his silence. Daniels muttered almost to himself, "I was just doing my job." Her head turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. "Your job was to protect. You chose to humiliate." His shoulders collapsed inward. For the first time, the room saw not a man in uniform, but a man exposed. No one clapped. No one shouted. Yet the chamber shifted, as if something sacred had been restored. Heads bowed, not to the officer, but to the woman whose restraint had shattered his authority more than rage ever could. The colonel sat back, hands folded neatly. She had said all she needed, and in that quiet, Daniel's fall was complete. ChatGPT said the door closed behind him with a hollow thud. No cheers, no greetings, not even a neighbor's nod. Daniels dropped his keys on the counter, the sound echoing in a house too quiet. He scrolled his phone. No messages, no calls returned. His daughter's number lit up the screen. He pressed it, waited, straight to voicemail. He didn't try again. From the window, he saw Mrs. Alvarez across the street gather her mail. She glanced his way, then turned her back quickly, slipping inside. Once she used to wave. Now the silence was sharper than words. He muttered to himself, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." The TV flickered with another panel replaying the trial. His own face, captured in shame, filled the screen. He turned it off. Couldn't stand it. A knock at the door startled him. He rushed, hoping that maybe his daughter, maybe someone. But when he opened it, only a flyer sat on the mat. Community meeting, standing against abuse of power. His name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. He whispered, "I still wore the badge. I served. But the walls answered back with silence. He walked to the mailbox, empty. Even the junk mail seemed to avoid him. The punishment wasn't prison, wasn't a sentence. It was erasure, the slow, suffocating realization that power meant nothing once respect was gone. Inside, Daniel sank into the chair. No gavel had fallen, but his life had already delivered its verdict. ChatGPT said, in the weeks that followed, the headlines shifted to new scandals, new crises. But in quiet corners, her story lived on. Teachers whispered it in staff rooms, cautious but firm. "We need to remind the kids what dignity looks like," one said softly. At the station, new cameras blinked from corners where shadows once hid. An officer muttered, "Things are different now. Can't look at folks the same." His partner didn't reply, but the silence meant agreement. In churches, pastors threaded her story into sermons without speaking her name. Sometimes, one preached, the strongest power is the quiet refusal to bend. Congregants nodded, some remembering the video, others sensing the weight beneath the words. At home dinners, parents told their children, "Respect is earned." It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It had a face behind it, a face most would never meet, but one that had shifted something in the air. In City Hall, a clerk signed off on a new oversight program. No one said aloud what sparked it, but the papers bore her shadow in every line. Whispers trailed into schools where students replayed the clip on muted phones. They didn't cheer anymore. They just watched, quiet, learning what strength without shouting could mean. Her name wasn't printed, her rank no longer debated. Yet every policy memo, every cautious glance, every lowered voice carried her presence. And though the news cycle had moved on, the scar remained, not to wound but to remind. The world hadn't changed overnight. But it had shifted, subtly, permanently, not by anger, not by force, but by the memory of one woman kneeling not in defeat, but in defiance of silence. ChatGPT said her hand hovered before it touched the cold stone. The names etched into the memorial wall seemed endless, stretching further than her eyes wanted to follow. For a moment, she let the silence hold her, heavier than the weight of all the stares she had endured. Her voice, when it came, was low, almost breaking. "Not for recognition," she whispered, her breath catching as her fingers traced one name, then another, "but for respect." The man who had tried to crush her earlier stood several paces back, unable to meet her gaze now. His uniform suddenly looked too heavy for him, his stance no longer commanding, but small, unsteady. He wanted to speak, but no words came. "You think dignity is silence," he finally muttered, half to himself. "I thought silence was weakness." She turned slightly, her eyes meeting his without anger, only something deeper, calmer. "You thought wrong." A hush settled over the small crowd that had gathered. Strangers shifted, their eyes moving from her to him and back again. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just watched, waiting for something neither of them would give. Her hand fell from the wall. She adjusted her uniform jacket, straightened her shoulders, and began to walk. Each step away from the memorial sounded louder than his entire authority. The officer swallowed hard, but didn't follow. His throat tightened as the realization sank in. She hadn't needed to win with words. She had already won by standing. The crowd parted as she moved past, her silence carrying a weight his commands never had. Upright, steady, unbroken, she walked on, leaving him standing in the shadow of his own downfall.